Ed Gein, aka the Plainfield Ghoul. The story of Ed Gein has had a lasting impact on popular culture as evidenced by its numerous appearances in movies, music, and literature. Gein's story was adapted into a number of movies including Deranged in 1974, In the Light of the Moon 2000, later retitled to Ed Gein for the US market, and Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield in 2007. Gein influenced the nature of book and film characters, most notably such fictional serial killers as Norman Bates from Psycho, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. At the time, the news reports of Gein's crimes spawned a subgenre of black humor. Since the 1950s, Gein has frequently been exploited in transgressive art or shock rock, often with no connection to his life or crimes beyond the shock value of his name. Gein was born in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. His parents, George and Augusta Gein, both natives of Wisconsin, had two sons, Henry George Gein, and his younger brother, Edward Theodore Gein. Despite Augusta's deep contempt for her husband, the marriage persisted because of the family's religious belief about divorce. Augusta Gein operated a small grocery store and eventually purchased a farm on the outskirts of the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, which then became the Gein family's permanent home. Augusta Gein moved to this location to prevent outsiders from influencing her sons. Edward Gein left the premises only to go to school. Besides school, he spent most of his time doing chores on the farm. Augusta, a fervent Lutheran, preached to her boys in the innate immorality of the world, the evil of drinking, and the belief that all women, herself excluded, were prostitutes and instruments of the devil. She reserved time every afternoon to read to them from the Bible, usually selecting graphic verses from the Old Testament dealing with death, murder, and divine retribution. With an effeminate demeanor, the younger Gein became a target for bullies. Classmates and teachers recalled off-putting mannerisms such as seemingly random laughter, as if he were laughing at his own personal jokes. To make matters worse, his mother scolded him whenever he tried to make friends. Despite his poor social development, he did fairly well in school, particularly in reading. Gein tried to make his mother happy, but she was rarely pleased with her boys. She often abused them, believing that they were destined to become failures like their father. During their teens and throughout their early adulthood, the boys remained detached from people outside of their farmstead, and so only had each other for company. After George Gein died of a heart attack in 1940, the Gein brothers began working at odd jobs to help with expenses. Both brothers were considered reliable and honest by residents of the community. While both worked as handymen, Ed Gein also frequently babysat for neighbors. He enjoyed babysitting, seeming to relate more easily to children than adults. Henry Gein began to reject his mother's view of the world and worried about his brother Ed's attachment to her. He spoke ill of her around his brother. On May 16, 1944, a brush fire burned close to the farm, and the Gein brothers went out to extinguish it. Reportedly, the brothers were separated, and as night fell, Ed Gein lost sight of his brother. When the fire was extinguished, he reported to the police that his brother was missing. When a search party was organized, Gein led them directly to his missing brother, who lay dead on the ground. The police had concerns about the circumstances under which the body was discovered. The ground on which Henry Gein lay was untouched by fire, and he had bruises on his head. Despite this, the police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner listed asphyxiation as the cause of death. Although, some investigators suspected that Ed Gein killed his brother. no charges were filed against him. After his brother's death, Gein lived alone with his mother, who died on December 29, 1945, following a series of strokes, at which time Gein lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. Gein remained on the farm, supporting himself with earnings from odd jobs. He boarded up rooms used by his mother, including the upstairs, downstairs parlor, and the living room, leaving them untouched. He lived in a small room next to the kitchen. Gein became interested in reading death cult magazines and adventure stories. On November 16, 1957, Plainfield hardware store owner Bernice Warden disappeared, and police had reason to suspect Gein. Warden's son had told investigators that Gein had been in the store the evening before the disappearance, saying he would return the following morning for a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for a gallon of antifreeze was the last receipt written by Warden on the morning she disappeared. Mr. Schley, a sheriff from the nearby town, was investigating the disappearance of Warden, which had led them to Gein's farmhouse. The sheriff had a warrant to search his home. As he walked through the trash in the darkened kitchen, he brushed into something hanging from the ceiling. He turned and shone his torch on the object. It was a naked human carcass, beheaded, disemboweled, and hung upside down from a ceiling beam. Mr. Schley gagged at the sight of it, but managed to avoid throwing up. The carcass turned out to be the freshly gutted remains of Miss Warden. Police found her head in a burlap sack in another part of the house. Nails had been hammered through each ear and tied together with twine, as if in readiness for the head to be hung up as a trophy. Detectives spent the entire night and the next day trawling through the house. What they found marked a horrific new low in the annals of American crime. Somebody had been using female body parts to fashion a series of ghoulish artifacts. A belt had been studded with nipples, a soup bowl had been created out of the top of a skull, and lampshades and chairs had been fashioned out of human skin. Police found a box full of noses, a curtain pull with a pair of women's lips sewed onto it. A shoebox under the bed contained dried female genitalia, and hanging up in the closet was a shirt made of human skin, complete with a pair of breasts. On the wall were the faces of 9 women, carefully preserved and mounted like the bizarre collection of a human hunter. Ed Gein had some serious explaining to do. Further searching the house, authorities found 4 noses, whole human bones and fragments, 9 masks of human skin, bowls made from human skulls, 10 female heads with the tops sawed off, human skin covering several chair seats, Mary Hogan's head in a paper bag, Bernice Warden's head in a burlap sack, 9 vulvas in a shoebox, skulls on his bedposts, organs in the refrigerator, a pair of lips on a drawstring for a window shade, a belt made from human female nipples, and a lampshade made from the skin of a human face. These artifacts were photographed at the crime lab and then were properly destroyed. When questioned, Gein told investigators that between 1947 and 1952, he made as many as 40 nocturnal visits to 3 local graveyards to exhume recently buried bodies, while he was in a daze-like state. On about 30 of those visits, he said he had come out of the daze while in the cemetery, left the grave in good order, and returned home empty-handed. On the other occasions, he dug up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother and took their bodies home, where he tanned their skins to make his paraphernalia. Gein admitted robbing 9 graves, leading investigators to their locations. Because authorities were uncertain as to whether the slight Gein was capable of single-handedly digging up a grave in a single evening, they exhumed 2 of the graves and found them empty, thus corroborating Gein's confession. Shortly after his mother's death, Gein had decided he wanted a sex change and began to create a woman's suit so he could pretend to be a female. Gein's practice of donning the tanned skins of women was described as an insane transvestite ritual. Gein denied having sex with the bodies he exhumed, explaining, "They smelled too bad." During interrogation, Gein also admitted to the shooting death of Mary Hogan, a tavern operator missing since 1954. A 16-year-old youth whose parents were friends of Gein and who attended ball games and movies with Gein, reported that he was aware of the shrunken heads, which Gein had described as relics from the Philippines sent by a cousin who had served in World War II. Upon investigation by the police, these were determined to be human facial skins, carefully peeled from the cadavers and used as masks by Gein. Washira County Sheriff Art Shaley allegedly physically assaulted Gein during questioning by banging Gein's head and face into a brick wall, causing Gein's initial confession to be ruled inadmissible. Schley died of a heart attack in December 1968 at age 43, only a month after testifying at Gein's trial. Many who knew him said he was traumatized by the horror of Gein's crime and that this, along with the fear of having to testify, especially about assaulting Gein, led to his early death. One of his friends said, "He was a victim of Ed Gein as surely as if he had butchered him." On November 21st, 1957, Gein was arraigned on 1 count of first-degree murder in Washira County Court, where he entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Found mentally incompetent and thus unfit to stand trial, Gein was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, now the Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility in Waupun, Wisconsin, and later transferred to the Mendota State Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. In 1968, Gein's doctors determined he was sane enough to stand trial. The trial began on November 14, 1968. Lasting 1 week, he was found guilty of first-degree murder by Judge Robert H. Gallmer. But because he was found to be legally insane, he spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. On July 26, 1984, Gein died of respiratory and heart failure due to cancer in Goodland Hall at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. His gravesite in the Plainfield Cemetery was frequently vandalized over the years. Souvenir seekers chipped off pieces of his gravestone before the bulk of it was stolen in 2000. The gravestone was recovered in June 2001 near Seattle and is now in a museum in Washira County.